This podcast is brought to you by the Dunfield Retirement Residence, a casually elegant retirement community located at Yonge and Eglinton in the heart of Midtown Toronto. Customized living options complement your independent, active lifestyle. Learn more at thedunfield.com.
Hey everybody, we're the Benchwarmers. Welcome back to your bi-weekly look at the world of Juice and Sports. I'm Jamie. I'm here with my co-host Gabe. Gabe, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Boker Tov to all of our listeners out there. Presumably,
if
it's
they're
the
listening,
morning.
it would be nice to do some analytics on when people are listening to us. I always think of podcasts as being like a morning.
Yeah, a commuting
medium.
move.
Yeah, exactly, because commuting. But I don't know, because now that I don't know, people work from home. Maybe they're listening to podcasts, late night in the bath or in midday evening.
If you're in the bath while listening to this, have a wonderful evening.
Yeah.
Do you think could we have some sort of Jewish ASMR part of our podcast?
Our producer Michael is showing us a breakdown. Our producer Michael is showing us a breakdown of when people listen to our podcast, and it appears to be primarily between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m.
Except it seems we usually release Thursdays and Fridays.
Yeah,
Friday mornings we get a bump.
Yeah, so the morning after we release, so that would suggest that people are downloading it on their way to work or on their way to commute. So that's great.
Thank you for that live analytics, producer Michael.
Yeah. So we have a very exciting interview coming up later in the episode with Sheldon Plener. Sheldon is a lawyer at Cassels Brock, and he is currently the acting chairman for the Ottawa Senators, which is essentially means that he's in the place of the owner.
We've had executives, we've had athletes from all the big four, we've had journalists. It's our first active team owner.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is, you'd think that would be where we started, but given the demographics of the group. But big get for Jamie on this podcast. I want to publicly recognize Jamie for the get.
Thank you
for bringing Mr. Plener onto the show.
It was very gracious of Sheldon to spend some time with us, and he is a family friend, so I definitely was taking advantage of the personal connection there. But
I'm not saying that. You brought it up.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I'm just saying we're all nepotism babies of one sort or another, so this is the time to shine for that. But it was really great of Sheldon to join us and talk about both his career with the Senators and his work, his relationship with deceased owner Eugene Melnyk, who we talk about is not Jewish, but a lot of people think is, and also his career, as a sports lawyer in various ways that he's been involved with, sort of a lot of the biggest, goings on in Canadian sports over the last several decades.
Until we did this interview, I had no idea what a sports lawyer did. I assumed they were essentially agents or, I guess negotiating various concussion settlements. And I guess they still do that, but it's a lot more than just that. And it was really interesting to hear Sheldon talk a lot about it and sort of give that perspective of how one becomes a sports lawyer. He mentions it's a very popular sort of law school dream, but it's a little more complicated to get there than you think. And we're really happy to chat through it with him.
Yeah, I think this was something I sort of wanted to look into a little bit in our podcast. Was sort of doing a little bit of I don't know if career fair is the right term for it. That just sort of wanted to get people with different perspectives on how to actually get there in terms of careers that, if we had young listeners who are thinking about a career in sports, how do you actually get there is pretty interesting story. And I don't want to spoil the interview, but Sheldon talks about how really the trick for him was becoming a really good business lawyer and obviously a very respected lawyer as well, and that got him clients in sports as well. So that was interesting to hear. I mean, just to answer your question a little bit, I mean, I as some of our listeners know, I am a lawyer. I did take a sports law class. Yeah, I did take a sports law class at Western University, where I went to law school, and they have a sports legal clinic as well. That's, I think, either sort of overseen by Richard McLaren, who is a professor at the university, and he is involved with the Court for Arbitration of Sport, which is sort of the appeal body for a lot of first level quasi judicial sports making decisions. So he had been involved in whatchamacallit, the cycling scandals, the doping scandals. Like he was on the panels that dealt with that. I can't remember if there's an Armstrong.
Right. If someone wants to take legal recourse from their sample being mishandled, there's got to be some sort of governing body or legal body that can organize something with that. And Richard McLaren, surprisingly, I mean, maybe not surprisingly, doesn't sound like a particularly Jewish name.
No, no, but it was very interesting to see, how his own progression as a sports lawyer, and that's, I think, a field where it's probably something Jewish kids are steered towards. Hey, yes. I'm really involved in sports. I would love to do something in sports. Well, why don't you get a law degree? You could be a sports agent or something like that. And it would be great to get a sports agent on to talk about their career path as well.
I have a distant cousin who's a sports agent. Yeah? His name's Ian Pulver. I should reach out. I think we're connected on LinkedIn and nowhere else.
Okay, this will be the portion of our, maybe we'll do a few podcasts in a row of just asking friends and relatives to pitch it and join us.
I promise you guys, we waited 2.5 years before we asked any friend or relative. Now
that's all we're doing. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. We're scraping that part of the Kishka pot.
But I really hope it's interesting, and I hope people will stick around for that and, pass this podcast along to your aspiring nephews and nieces and things like that who want a job in sports and want to know more about what that means, and hopefully we'll have some more interviews in the future with guests who can shine some light on that. Before we get to the interview with Sheldon, just to do our typical Jews and sports news. Not a ton going on in the world of sports. I mean, it's football season, it's basketball season. We talked last time about Denny Avdia having a little run. I can say personally that he was picked up in my fantasy basketball league. I don't know if that means much, but that's usually a sign that someone is coming together in a pretty significant way. This could be the jump that he's making and being into being a sort of reliable starter.
It's starting to really happen for him. I don't think he got the triple double, but he came really, really close to getting the triple double last week. And starting to get the team. There's a lot of playing time. It's up for grabs. So if he can sort of grab the reins a little bit and come into his own in his next year in the league, it's a very big move for Denny. And I guess I wonder what his overall claim rate in fantasy sports leagues is, because I imagine it's probably about as true of a market like understanding of the quality of a player more than any other one. So that's definitely sort of a macroeconomic view of it. Interestingly, I also, we noticed we missed on our last World Cup preview episode, and the World Cup's been going on. United States goaltender Matt Turner, whose father is Jewish, they just reached the second round. So congratulations to Matt. There are two.
Yeah, we should say we're recording right after the Iran U.S. game, and I'm going to guess most Jewish soccer fans, regardless of where they're from, were probably cheering for the U.S. in that one.
They had the Jewish players. Definitely.
Yeah, they had the Jewish players too. But yeah, good. But Mazel Tov to DeAndre Yedlin and Matt Turner for making it to the second round or the knockout stage. Is that what the official term is?
I think it's the round of 16, the knockout stage. So I think you presume. I know the players of Iran engaged in various protests against the Iranian government or the regime. Do you think the Ayatollah watches Iranian soccer games, like national team games?
Good question. I have no idea. I mean, it. On the one hand, like they seem sort of important. There were reports the other day of their family members being threatened if the Iranian players
if they continue to protest.
Further.
Yeah,
and I mean, we'll never divorce sports from politics, good or bad. I mean, those things are always going to be connected, especially with these sort of national teams and a stage as big as the World Cup. So I have no idea if he watches or is a sports fan. Probably somebody gave him a briefing on at the very least on whether or not there was any sort of protest or anything like that was going to affect things back home.
So if the Ayatollah I just wonder, because if the Ayatollah is watching the game and we've sort of gotten the world Jewry cheering against the Ayatollah, who do you think the highest ranking Jew in America was watching the Team USA part of the game, or in England? I mean, the British, a lot of British Jewish fans, Tottenham Hotspur, the England captain plays, their owner is Dan Levy, very famous
Right.
Jewish guy.
So was Anthony Blinken the Secretary of State? Was he watching the game? I mean,
Yeah,
probably not just because like I'm sure that being a Secretary
he had other things
of
to do.
State, like your day is probably booked like 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. kind of thing. But I'm sure he was aware of it.
But
he was aware of it.
I meant more in like the supreme leader category. Like, do you think like Yoel Teitelbaum turned on the game for any minute?
I see. Maybe. I doubt it. Probably not that much interest in the secular world. But if there is, maybe he has some.
But football is the global game of every culture. It's all football. Yeah. But I think Anthony Blinken is probably, you're right, that's probably the highest ranking Jewish person.
And sort of a matter of state, when the U.S. faces off against Iran in a World Cup setting.
I think it's a matter of state. Like I wonder if there's some sort of like, some sort of email diplomacy going on. This actually reminds me of a story that when I was in high school, my Hebrew school, my confirmation class went to visit the United Nations in New York. And the ambassador to the UN at the time for Israel was like some 25-year-old guy, or he was not the ambassador, he was the staffer that gave us the tour. He was an American guy who had moved to Israel and came back to be on the Israeli delegation to the UN. So we went and we visited, and he told us the story of a time where Iran sent their Happy New Year email to all of the other teams in world football and accidentally forgot to remove Israel from the listserv. So about 10 minutes later, the Israeli Soccer Federation gets an email from the Iranian Soccer Federation saying, sorry, we sent that welcoming happy email. It wasn't actually meant for you.
That's
funny. My closest experience with the Iranian Soccer Federation.
I like the idea that like Iran could, accidentally acknowledge Israel's right to exist by virtue of having sent it a listserv response. Accidentally replying all instead of replying all -1.
That's exactly what it was. And they didn't want to have to do that. It's like Trump accidentally calling Taiwan just because it was on the list of countries that was placed in front of him.
Right.
Like to introduce himself, like they just, this is all of the countries. Oh wait, that one's not good.
Well, sports and international relations, they go hand in hand, especially when we have these sort of global meetups like the World Cup. Whenever there's two teams playing, I like to think about I made a joke on Twitter the other day about thinking about the teams' histories when they're playing each other when it was Germany versus Japan. But sometimes it's odd, and it's like I don't know what the relationship is between Ecuador and the Netherlands, for example. There must be some. There must have been some at some point. I'm sure there's some people in Ecuador who are from the Netherlands, and or vice versa. And I'm interested in hearing all those stories because, like, it's just an interesting thing to think about. Different people from around the world in their own little diasporas. With competing loyalties or competing interests. I mean, in different
though
teams.
It's interesting to think about like forms of government. Like that group is Germany, Japan, Spain, and Costa Rica. So like 70 years ago, 3 fascist countries in Costa Rica.
That's right.
And the same goes for the group that has Poland, Argentina. Like they have their fascist histories, and then and Saudi Arabia. That was the other one in that same group. So not a lot of like democracy historically going on there.
I have definitely heard from people who have said to me that they cheer for the teams that they think are the least anti-Semitic from the countries that are the least anti-Semitic.
That's like very good Olympic rule. It's a very good World Cup rule.
Yeah. So like it didn't work out the other day, but like, we were cheering for Canada, obviously, because we're from here. But like, you can also just cheer against Croatia.
Yeah,
because
I
don't want to make this a whole thing about whether or not Croatia is full of anti-Semites. At least historically, no disrespect to any Croatians or Croatian Canadians that we might know. But I'm just saying, if you have to think about which of these countries, like traditionally, is full of anti-Semites, it's not Canada. Not that we don't have our own sordid past here, but I'm just saying, like, you can make those decisions if you want. When Croatia plays Morocco, I don't know exactly who you're going to root for or who one is supposed to root for.
Well, you see like Croatia versus Germany, and you think like, which Nazi is the least bad at this moment? Right. But I mean, Argentina's got plenty of Jews. I think in the Argentina versus Saudi, obviously it was fun to see Saudi win. But like, if you're rooting for the plurality of Jews, I think Argentina is going to take it. Probably, probably in that in that whole Argentinian group.
But now I think the only real Jewish rooting interest going on is the states
as they actually have two Jewish players,
because they actually have two Jewish players, and lots of Jews live in America, so that's good.
I think so. England too. I mean, again, not a lot of Jewish players, but pretty serious Jewish soccer culture. Anti-Semitic soccer culture as well, plenty of that. But pretty serious.
Or the Dutch,
Jewish
or the Dutch, I guess. I mean, I'm sure some of those guys play for Ajax or whatever. And
that's true. I think their manager, the Dutch manager, we talked about it last week, was sort of a lifelong Ajax guy.
Okay, cool.
And there hasn't been a lot of historical. There's been a lot of historical Dutch Jewish players, just not a lot with a lot of World Cup experience. But you're right. I think that's sort of, you focus on not as Nazi occupied Europe and North America, and that's where you get your Jewish rooting interest. But for the next, I think also as Middle Eastern diaspora people, we could also really get behind some of the less expected African countries, like Senegal, a French colony, and Ghana as well, from countries that, like, places that are sort of a diaspora and what's the word I'm looking for? Dispersed people all throughout Africa for, Pan-African colonialism. Definitely a lot of historical Jewish analogy in there. Yeah. So totally something worth rooting for.
One other thing I want to mention is, there was so much focus, I think, here at home about Canada's potential chances at the World Cup, that I think an underreported story, something I haven't really seen many people talking about, is Canada winning the Davis Cup for the first time.
Oh, it's amazing. That's true.
Beating Australia the other day. And part of that victory was Israeli-born son of a Jewish mother.
Possibly Jewish.
Possibly Jewish. I don't know how he identifies, Denis Shapovalov, who, took down Thanasi Kokkinakis of Australia to help secure the Davis Cup victory. Pretty big deal. I mean, in terms of world tennis, right?
Very big deal. Canada has never won the Davis Cup before. I think we've made the final a couple of times, but it's surprisingly less big of a deal than I think we would expect it to be. Maybe in a non-World Cup year.
Maybe it is the World Cup thing. I feel like it's the kind of thing that if they had like a big tournament with everyone there at the same time, it would be a big thing. But I feel like the Davis Cup is often like, it's like they're always playing games for it, or rounds for it here and there. Like there's not like just one consolidated time. If they just had like a World Cup of tennis, but on the other hand, it's just not a team sport. Like I feel like when they make it, and not to diminish the win at all or the importance of the Davis Cup, but I just mean from a spectator perspective, like it doesn't really feel like a team sport. You're watching one-on-one battles, which is part of what I think makes tennis so amazing and like so watchable when it's at its peak. But anyways, congratulations to Team Canada. Nice to see a Canadian team succeed on the world stage in a sport that we're not traditionally known to be the best at. No shade at the Canadians men's team. We will be there rooting for you in 2026.
It's true, and it's Shapovalov isn't even the number one player in Canada anymore.
Right? Yeah, Felix Auger-Aliassime.
To Felix, who he won something like 18 matches in 3 tournaments in a row this summer. Crazy. And it sort of flew under the radar. We would have been all over it if he was Jewish, but he's not. So apologies to our listeners, our tennis fan listeners.
Okay, let's go to our interview with Sheldon Plener.
To lead into this interview, I want to mention it took until 1955 for the country of Canada to have a Jewish senator. It took until 1968 for them to have a second Jewish senator. It took the Benchwarmers until roughly episode 70 to have our first Jewish senator. Huh. So, ladies and gentlemen, Sheldon Plener.
Did you know April 2023 is Israel's 75th anniversary? In honor of this huge milestone, UJA Federation of Greater Toronto is planning an epic trip to Israel, and all of Canada is invited. Israel's anniversary, Yom HaAtzmaut, is a one-of-a-kind experience. Streets are filled with parties, fireworks, music, and dancing. On UJA's Israel 75, you'll get to join the celebration. 75 is not a regular anniversary, and Israel 75 is not your typical trip. You'll get a truly unique experience of the country, no matter how many times you've been before. With 10 specialized tracks, you can create an itinerary that is totally personalized, whether you're a foodie, an adrenaline seeker, a TV buff, or politically minded. The best part? You can mix and match tracks on different days. Embark on a thrilling adventure one day and a culinary experience the next. Let your own interests be your guide and experience everything Israel has to offer. To learn more about the trip, visit ujaisrael75.com. That's ujaisrael75.com.
Hi, I'm Meredith Shiner, and I'm the host of a new podcast from Tablet Studios called The Franchise: Jews, Sports, and America. In this limited series, I'll be talking to journalists, athletes, professional sports nerds, and more about the intersections of contemporary Jewish American life and sports culture. This show tackles the big questions like, do we still need Sandy Koufax as our icon? And are the Mets the most Jewish team in sports? And are sports just? But really, it's a show that uses sports as the prism to explore the most pressing issues for American Jews today, from identity to justice to assimilation or lack thereof. The show is serious and fun and serious fun, and I hope you'll listen to The Franchise wherever you get your podcasts.
We're joined tonight by Sheldon Plener. Thanks for joining us, Sheldon. Can you give our audience a little bit of an introduction?
Sure. The name is Sheldon Plener, as you mentioned. I joined a law firm called Cassels Brock Blackwell back in 1978. I've been there close to 44 years. My general practice is mergers and acquisitions, but during the course of my career, I was lucky enough to become involved in sports. And so I have a sort of a subspecialty in sports law. Not something I planned on, but it happened, and I'm glad it did. I'm glad it happened because it's turned out to be a very interesting part of my practice.
So, Sheldon, one of the things we want to talk to you about is your role with the Ottawa Senators, but I want to go a little earlier chronologically and ask you about your time with the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, because I understand you were a 5-time All-Star in the intercounty baseball league.
That's true. First of all, I want to know, Jamie, whether you've ever interviewed anybody that's actually been at your bris.
This is the first one, and this is quite the outing, I should say. Sheldon's a longtime family friend, and
it is Jamie's get. You're Jamie's get as a guest. There's no doubt about that anymore.
We used to live. You guys used to live not right behind us, but
kitty corner.
It was very close, very close. And your daughter and my sister are best friends. That's exactly. There's a lot of layers to the relationship.
So I had a huge interest in baseball. And not in hockey, and which is surprising, I guess. And I played all levels of baseball up to the intercounty Leafs. I think I played for them from about 1973 for 5 years. I was a 5-time All-Star, fortunately. I worked hard for that. I practiced a lot and aspired to become a professional baseball player. And I was actually scouted by the Detroit Tigers, Cincinnati Reds. But back in those days, talking about 1973, there wasn't a big market for Jewish center fielders. And, I say this because if I do have a regret in life, because I came from a very modest family, I think if my father would have sent me to UCLA, or could afford to do that, I probably at least could have made sort of a minor league, maybe even higher level of baseball. And so when that didn't come about, I figured, okay, I need to make a living somehow. So I turned to law.
So, obviously you've got a passion for baseball, a passion for sports. You may have been one of the only Jewish players in the Intercounty Baseball League at the time.
100%.
So, this is going to probably be a theme in my line of questioning here, but you went to a much more Jewish way of life, law. And I ask sort of, what does a sports lawyer do? Like, what is under the purview of a sports lawyer?
Okay, well, I get asked that question quite a bit because, I've gone to law schools. First of all, virtually not every, but so many young lawyers aspire to become involved in sports law. And really, sports law is nothing more than commercial law, business law. And so, in my role as outside counsel for the team, I get involved in everything from employment issues to funding of the hockey club to deciding whether the people who clean the ice between intermissions wears a helmet or not, to players who have issues off ice. The only thing I don't do is deal directly with the contracts for the players, because that is prescribed by, there's a form of contract that is being negotiated with the union, and basically the general manager fills in the blanks, how many years, salary, and there's some minor opportunity for bonuses. So when people think of sports lawyer, I'm not a sports agent, but I have done work. I do contracts for coaches and general managers, and that's sort of how I got involved. Well, I originally got involved. I was I guess fortunate because John Bitove back in 1993 was in the bidding process to buy an expansion franchise from the NBA. So the NBA had decided, not between cities, but who in Toronto would be granted a franchise. And back in those days, Larry Tannenbaum had made an application. Michael Cole, who's well known in the concert business, had made an application, and so did John Bitove. And John showed up in our office one day to meet with my partner at the time, still my partner, David Peterson, the former premier, and said, "Look, I want to apply for this franchise." And John had a relationship earlier with people like Isaiah Thomas. They went to the same college together. And David Peterson called me into his office and said, "Meet John Bitove. He wants to get an expansion franchise for the Raptors." And the next 4 or 5 years of my life was making the application, attending at the NBA offices, negotiating the expansion agreement. And so what's an expansion agreement? Expansion agreement basically is, here's how much I'm going to pay for the franchise. Here are some of the perks I'm going to get or not get. For example, we weren't allowed the first overall draft choice because it really went down to, like, what facility are we going to have? What's our undertaking with regard to where we're going to have our a stadium or arena? In fact, surprisingly enough, in our application, we had chosen the parking lot behind the Eaton Center. In fact, that was the original intention, as opposed to where it is now. And so that was sort of my first connection with sports. And, I did the footprint license and the expansion agreement. And in fact, the Vancouver at the time just piggybacked on the expansion agreement that I had negotiated.
Oh, interesting. Worked out better for the Raptors.
Yeah. And it was kind of fortunate because I remember doing due diligence at the NBA offices, and I was in a boardroom. And people like David Stern was the commissioner then, and Russ Granick was the deputy commissioner. And they put me in a boardroom, and around the boardroom, they had the pictures of every NBA championship team from 1946 onwards. And I'm looking at the wall, and I'm sitting across from an NBA lawyer, and I'm saying, at my law firm, which was not what you would call a Jewish law firm. I was like the first Jew there. And
not the last, though.
I looked on the wall and I saw 1946, 1947, the names were Fleischman. And then it gravitated to how it looks now. And I said to the lawyer, I said, my partners in my firm would never believe that these Jewish basketball players dominated the NBA for about the first 2 or 3 years. And so anyways, I took a break for lunch. And I came back, and I'd asked for a whole bunch of due diligence materials, like lawsuits and that type of thing. And on top of it was the picture of from the first 2 or 3 frames of these Jewish athletes that won the NBA championship. So,
that's great.
So that was sort of my first real exposure. And then when Pat Quinn was negotiating with the Leafs. I think he was previously with Vancouver, and we had an affiliate in Vancouver, and they asked, does anybody have any sports expertise? And they referred Pat to me. And at that time, it was a big secret that Pat was going to come join the Leafs. And I got into a long, drawn-out negotiation with Ken Dryden at the time on Pat's contract. And
I think long and dried out describes Ken Dryden pretty well.
Well, he once said to me, I was once at a St. Michael's Majors game, and he was there with his brother. His brother was a goalie as well, and he didn't have a great memory of me in the negotiation with Pat. They didn't get along that well, and we sort of hardballed somewhat because we knew that they wanted to sign Pat badly. And I asked Ken Dryden, I said, and he knew I was connected with the Ottawa Senators at the time. I said, Ken, like, which team do you have the most memories for? What were your favorite teams? He said, well, of course, Montreal. I played there. I won Vezina Trophy. I won championship. And then obviously the Toronto Maple Leafs, because I was there. I was, I think he was the president, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, any other teams? He says, any team that plays the Ottawa Senators. So
you think it'd be good? You think Ken Dryden would have a leg up negotiating compared to other sports executives with his, both legal and playing background?
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyways, it was when Pat finally signed, we went out for dinner with our wives. It was, Pat Quinn and his wife and Ken Dryden and his wife and Noni, my wife, Noni, and I. And they didn't talk about the great things they did in their careers, like Pat body checking Bobby Orr, that famous body check, or Ken Dryden. They talked about the crazy things that happened in hockey. It was refreshing.
I probably am speaking for a lot of our audience here. Do you remember where you had dinner?
Yeah, it was Harbor 60.
Very nice.
That's a good celebration.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was great. So that all leads to. I don't want to talk too much, but
no, this is supposed to be you talking as much as possible.
It all leads to Eugene Melnyk calling me one day, and it's interesting. Eugene Melnyk is not Jewish.
He's not Jewish. You took the words right out of my mouth. It's a surprising non-Jew.
But he used to get calls from rabbis all the time for contributions, and I would have rabbis that show up at my boardroom. In our reception area, because Eugene had referred them to me to deal with any donation requests. So anyway, so Eugene went to St. Mike's, and that was his alma mater, and he had a fondness for him. And the Basilian Fathers were partners in the St. Michael's Majors, along with a group of old boys from the school, and they were having issues and financing issues. So they called Eugene and said, Eugene, we want you to buy the hockey team. And, it's a OHL hockey team with, a great history. A lot of former Hall of Famers came from St. Mike's. And so he called me up and said, do you do any sports law? Do you know? I said, of course I do sports law. It was probably 10 or 15% of my practice, but it was I don't know that you can make a full-time practice out of just being a sports lawyer. That's what I sort of the law grads. I say to them, become the best business lawyer you can be, learn everything you can about business law, and then apply that to sports. So I said, I do have sports law experience. I told him about the Raptors. I told him about my Pat Quinn relationship. I acted for Sherwood Schwartz when he bought the Argos. And
that's one hell of a name.
Yeah, I know. He's from New York. Sherwood Schwartz. I always remember. I think they actually paid him to take the cup.
Yeah, you haven't worked out the math fully, but
right. So I acted for Eugene on the purchase of the hockey club, and if you go to the school, you'll see that there's a Eugene Melnyk field in the back behind the school. And interesting story is that I negotiated a donation agreement with St. Mike's. As to the name on the field, whether it's in perpetuity and all that kind of stuff.
It's a good clue that he's not Jewish, given how much the Melnyk family name is on various Catholic institutions throughout Ontario.
Well, the funny story is that because he made this contribution, this donation, they had a big assembly for him. And they had like all the students out there in the auditorium, and they had all the old boys. They called old boys because they attended the school, and they went on, became very successful, and they made a lot of money to the school. Sure. So I attended with Eugene to this assembly, and we're all getting lined up to go on the podium. And the head Basilian father at the time, I can't remember his name, calls us all up, all the old boys, and they're all standing behind them one by one, afterwards, behind them. And Eugene says, come on up with me. I said, no, I'm not involved. And like Eugene had a real sense of humor. So anyways, he drags me up, and, there's like 5 old boys, and then Eugene, and then me, and then the head Basilian father. and they go one by one. He knows the Brazilian father. He knows each of them, and he talks about that he's got a successful car dealership. He went on to set up an insurance company, and then Eugene is like laughing on the stage because he knows that he doesn't have a clue who I am, and the continuity breaks up when he comes to me, and he looks around to me, and he starts stuttering, and somebody says, "Sheldon Plener, he's lawyer." So I'm sure, like, I was the only Jewish guy, obviously, on the podium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least they didn't try to give you communion while you're up there.
Exactly.
So through Eugene, I guess through your connection with him, you became involved with the Senators, and your position with them, I ultimately became governor and chairman. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I got involved in the acquisition of the Senators in 2003. The Ottawa Senators were in, call it CCAA, and as was Buffalo at the time. And so we looked at, the possibilities of either one of them. Mm-hmm. And we decided that Ottawa was the place where he wanted to be. People tried to talk into trying to buy Ottawa out of receivership and then move it, like to North York or something like that. Right. But that wasn't in the cards, and that's not something we pursued with the NHL. We wanted to be good partners. And so Eugene ended up buying it personally. He bought the arena and he bought the hockey club. We had a really good team in that year as well. I think we went like that. That was the year when we had people like Marian Hossa and Chara and Alfredson and Spencer.
Yeah, Alfredson last years there.
We were almost in the. It was almost possible that we bought the team near the end of the season and could have won the Stanley Cup.
How often does that happen?
No, yeah. So Eugene was the governor. I was the alternate governor, and I've attended Board of Governor meetings since 2003. So it's coming up to 20 years. I had been a director, his legal counsel throughout, and unfortunately passed away back in March. And I had, to a certain extent, been groomed to provide some succession for him if anything happened to him. He didn't obviously expect to die, but he died young, and unfortunately, he was a good friend. And so, I guess naturally somebody had to assume the role of chairman and governor. And since I am also an executor, I was sort of the logical choice. And so, I guess in a lot of ways, the management reports to the board of directors. In some cases, they would report to me on certain items. And so, my day-to-day can consist of, settling the budget, team budgets, along with the board of directors, getting calls from the general manager with regard to free agents, for example, with regard to trades, with regard to any number of things involving a hockey club. So I'm not an owner in that I don't have equity, but I have this responsibility along with the board of directors and the executors for the operation of the hockey club, and obviously in consultation with his two daughters.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the Board of Governors meetings are like? I mean, I assume what actually is said in the meetings themselves is confidential between the owners, but what's it like sitting down with, another 28, 29, owners, their representatives, and sort of, it's such an interesting idea of just like, those are the people who make up the league, really. The owners are the ones deciding the rules and what strategy or tenor the league's going to take, things like that.
Right. So, you've got this huge boardroom. You've got like 32 clubs. Mm-hmm. And let's say that each club has got a governor and an alternate governor that are sitting at the table. And behind us are chairs for people like, a general manager may be there, or a CFO, or a business person. And the meetings are conducted by Gary as the commissioner. And he has, a lot of his management team at the meetings. And it's very interesting. I can't say enough about how competent people like Gary Bettman are and Bill Daly. They're unbelievable. I can't even call my own son and get an immediate reaction. But seriously. But if I call Gary or Bill or send them an email, they are right on top of it. Wow. And I've never seen...
It's a good skill to have.
I've never seen such competency. I mean, I specialize in M&A and business law, and they are so up to speed on competition law, on insurance matters, on COVID and how to deal with COVID, it's a small, tight knit group that oversees all this. But anyways, so the meeting consists of a number of presentations on different things. It could deal with changes of ownership of franchise that need to be approved by the Board of Governors. It could deal with COVID and COVID policy, which are now mostly in the past. It could deal with how to deal with infractions. What infractions could be subject to appeal, to review. It could deal with new business relationships, like broadcast relationships. It could deal with hockey equipment. It could deal with anything you can imagine in hockey of a big picture material matter would be brought to those meetings. But the NHL also has, in addition to the commissioner and his management team or group, has an executive committee. And just like a law firm, you can't have 250 lawyers making decisions. You basically have
especially if that room leans a little more Jewish than the rest. It's like there's the old joke about 2 Jews and 3 opinions. I can't imagine what a room of 60 odd sports executives, they probably have 75 or so opinions at any given time.
I think the politics of it is we have fantastic trust in Gary, and he's a huge supporter of our Canadian franchise hockey teams. I think he gets a bad rap when it comes to whether he supports teams in Canada. He's a huge supporter. Anyways, I can't say enough about how impressed I am as to how they operate the league. And, I think they've done a fantastic job, negotiating, things like union contracts and that type of thing.
That's really interesting. It's interesting to hear about the sort of, I don't want to say less glamorous necessarily, but the sort of, the things that have to happen behind the scenes, when you're talking about, provisions for equipment or COVID policies, things like this. It's there are some wheels that need to be turned behind in the back rooms that sort of do make everything happen. I think as fans, we, if everything works smoothly, we don't see any of it. We don't notice any of it, right. If a team runs out of pucks or something like that, then we all notice. But if everything runs smoothly, I feel like, well, I think it's fair to say you're among the people who keep things running smoothly and making sure those wheels turn.
I don't give myself that much credit, but I did have an interesting thing happen, which was that a few years ago was the 100th anniversary of the first meeting of the Board of Governors in Montreal to establish the league. And I happened to be in the room 100 years later when they took a picture similar to the picture they took 100 years before. And so
that's very cool.
From a notoriety point of view, I'm in that picture 100 years later. So that's kind of cool.
That's pretty cool. And now, 50 years from now, when someone's looking at those pictures, when they're starting a new sports franchise, they'll say, "Look, there's Sheldon."
Yeah, probably like a little dot because 100 years ago in Montreal, now maybe
it was like 6 people.
There was like 6 people. Now in that boardroom, there must have been 110 people, 120 people. Who knows?
I'm sort of picturing something that's like halfway between like the United Nations and like the commission scenes from The Godfather.
Yeah,
but
it's very professionally run. It's well organized. It's well attended, and I think it's a very fluid kind of meeting and very interesting presentations.
It feels like people don't get into sports ownership as like a casual thing. Like it's something you do, because it's your passion.
Well, that was Eugene's passion. I mean, he dreamed about winning a Stanley Cup, and I'm so sad for him that we might be a year or two away from it with our young crop of players. But you're talking about very successful people, very successful risk takers. That's how you make a lot of money, is you take risks, and you are competitive, and they want to win, and they have general managers who want to win. Imagine general managers, if they don't win, they're fired. The longevity of general managers and coaches is not great. And so there's a lot of pressure on them to win, and so they're there to win, but they're also very gentlemanly, very cordial. I find, if your team plays, for example, Pagula owns the Sabres, and when Ottawa plays there, he makes a box available. He provides food and drink. When it comes to, if somebody wants to build a new arena and you want to go to Edmonton and see what their arena looks like, they'll open it up, give you a tour. So they're competitive on the ice, but when it comes to business, they tend to share things.
I mean, growing the game is always
and cooperation.
Yeah, it's all obviously very much like you think about. The league is still obviously it's extraordinarily popular, but there's always room to grow.
Exactly, and we've grown substantially, and so it's going to be, franchise values have increased substantially.
Sure.
People, it just provides so much enjoyment to follow your hockey club. It gives you, for, I don't know, 6 or 7 months of the year, you can follow them watch them on TV, attend in person, email or message your general manager when you see something on the ice that bothers you. You get back.
It's good to know that Gary Bettman is really quick replying to his emails. I'm sure none of our listeners will ever try and do anything like that.
Exactly.
Well, Sheldon, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Before we go, I just wanted to ask you talked about being a baseball fan when you were a kid. It's something we often ask our guests. Was there any particular Jewish athlete that you looked up to when you were a kid? Given your vintage, you're a little young for Koufax, but you would have seen his later years, I guess.
I do remember Koufax.
Yeah.
Very well, and so he. First of all, I was a big Mickey Mantle fan, not Jewish.
Oh, okay.
Not often mistaken for a Jew either.
No, but Sandy Koufax and Hank Greenberg were two idols as well. Greenberg was before my time, and it's interesting. I can tell you one last story, which is during the course of conducting Senators business, I met a banker in New York whose name was Stephen Greenberg. And I said, could there be a connection here? So I looked him up and Googled him, and he is the son of Hank Greenberg.
Wow.
And I met with him in New York, and we didn't talk, because I've read the Hank Greenberg story about 5 times. I just find it fascinating. And we talked about his 58 home runs and how basically nobody wanted to pitch to him because they were fearful that he might break Ruth's record.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I mentioned to his son, I said, that 58 home runs, that was, and so he told me, he said that after that 58 home run year, they tried to reduce his salary.
Wow.
I said, what? He had 58 home runs. Why would they do that? Because the year before he had something like 180 RBIs. And so because his RBI total wasn't as high as the year before, they tried to negotiate to lower his salary. So I always found that interesting and funny. So
one of
Koufax and Greenberg, the fact that they wouldn't play on Yom Kippur, I found it sort of chokes me up a little bit. The fact that being on the center stage in sports and to take that stand is unbelievable. I can just imagine them walking in the synagogue on Yom Kippur when their team is in the World Series, and the kind of applause and ovation they would have gotten at the time.
There's the story. It was Rosh Hashanah one year, Yom Kippur one year. Greenberg didn't play. Comes back the next day and hits 2 home runs, including the one to win the pennant. And the Detroit Free Press the next day ran the headline "Shana Tova."
Right. I think there was also the one where Koufax didn't play and Drysdale pitched.
Yeah.
And he lost badly. And I guess he was questioned by the press afterwards, and he said something like, "I can only guess you probably wish I was Jewish."
And I think Koufax came back and won the last game of that series.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope that's enough content for you guys.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sheldon. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks again to Sheldon for joining us, our first guest to be at my bris, and hopefully not our last, or maybe our last. I don't know who else would. I don't have a guest list. I wasn't really. I had bigger fish to fry that day.
Great interview. It was a really fascinating conversation and sort of a bit of a departure,
Yeah.
a little more, I would say, businessy than conversations we've had in the past, but still very interesting.
But interesting to hear those stories, and his career ranging from intercounty baseball days all the way to the NHL Board of Governors. So, really, thanks again for joining us, and hopefully people found that interesting. And again, send this along to your young friends and family who may need some career advice. Looking forward. As always, you can find our podcasts, articles, and everything else at the Canadian Jewish News' website, the CJN.ca. For the first time in its 63-year history, the Canadian Jewish News can accept charitable donations. So, if you're thinking about an end-of-year gift, consider the Canadian Jewish News. And you can find us on Twitter at Menschwarmers, as long as Herr Musk will have us there. Like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.
The Dunfield Retirement Residence offers customized living options to complement your independent, active lifestyle. Welcome home. Welcome to the Dunfield. Visit us at thedunfield.com to book a personal tour.